yesterday, but the rules are going to be pretty simple. Each candidate gets 5 minutes for opening remarks. Then we're going to alternate asking questions that you all, the audience, submitted between the different candidates. And then we'll finish up with 5 minutes at the end, closing remarks for the candidates. And if any candidate wants to try to rebut the opposing candidate, we'll give them 30 seconds at the very end of that question.
I have grown frustrated with laws and policies that shatter the security of our community. I have grown sickened by the fact that law enforcement are treated like criminals by so-called political leaders. And I am outraged that so-called self-interested career politicians stand by and do nothing while pretending to do something. Now, I've been a prosecutor in Ventura County for over 17 years. I'm actually the first candidate for this position to actually come from this county in decades. And in my 17 years, I prosecuted just about everything that walks and crawls in the office. I prosecuted some of the most complex and violent crimes our county has had in that time. I prosecuted burglaries, robberies, child abuse, gang crimes, hate crimes, and murders, which is where I have been working for over the last 7 years. And throughout my entire time in the DA's office, I have had one guiding principle. I call it my number one rule, and it's the rule I live by in doing this job that I love so much. And that's victims come first. And for me, what that meant, that serving the public, serving you, serving the victims on these cases and their families was more important than my pride, my ego, and my professional career if necessary. I have never, ever, ever violated that rule. And I never will. And over the last few years in California, I've become frustrated. Now, mind you, I'm not a politician. I've never run for office in my life. I never had any interest in running for office. I had no interest in being the district attorney. But the last few years in California, I'd seen some things that really started to trouble me, that violated that rule. Number one, laws that violated victims' rights, that put your rights in danger, significantly hurting you without you knowing it. Number two was the fact that I didn't know about it. I'm a prosecutor in the DA's office. I prosecute homicides, and there were changes in the criminal justice system that I didn't know about. If I don't know about it, how is it that you're supposed to know about? I wouldn't find out until I get that email at the end of the year that would tell me some of the new laws. And some of the new laws were so frightening to me, my mouth would literally drop open. Number three, I don't like the way law enforcement was being treated. Things had switched in California, where the criminals are now the victims, and law enforcement are now the criminals. And all the while, victims and their rights are being marginalized and ignored, re-victimizing them all over again in the process. Lastly, I didn't like that self-interested political decisions were being made in the area of criminal justice. When you're running for DA, if you're going to be a prosecutor, it has to be to serve the public. Serve the public first. Solutions that are going to be real, and not solutions that just sound good. Now, all of you here today are probably thinking that you're here to hear about our respective platforms. You are not. You are here today to determine what leadership is and what it is not. See, district attorney sets the tone in this county. The district attorney and how they operate and how they decide to work their office and work with their employees sets the tone for the type of county that you want. And what you're going to learn is that leadership is abiding by a set of guiding principles. It's going to be always put other people first. Give credit to people and the work that they do, and take the blame when they fail. What leadership is not is claiming innovations that you did not innovate, bragging about accomplishments that you did not accomplish, and changing your political platform when the political winds changed. If you have to tell people you're a leader, you are not. I look forward to your questions.
John, go ahead, speak. First question will be coming to Mr. Barrick. This comes from Chris Roth. I live next door to the perpetrator of vandalism, illegal entry, and gun crimes that occurred in my Thousand Oaks neighborhood. This person was released without bail to live near the affected homes due to the California Supreme Court ruling People versus Humphrey, and has been awaiting trial for close to a year. How would you communicate and protect the victim's rights in my terrorized neighborhood?
Yeah, so in 2020, there was a vote by California voters that we did not want to eliminate cash bail. And then a fast one got pulled on us by the California Supreme Court, where they said, we don't care what the will of the people is. We think no cash bail is constitutional. So the reality is there's not a lot we can do. But someone needs to tell you that so you can fight. Now, what we can do is, number one, be far more aggressive in the hearings when people first get arraigned and fight for those, to keep those people in custody and make a better argument in court. But number two, we have to allow our prosecutors to go out and speak to these family members, these people who affected the people in the community. Now, my understanding of that incident is that prosecutors have not been permitted to go and speak to the community, and they should. Because how can we know what you need if we aren't permitted to meet with you? So that's, I think, one of the best ways to help prevent this is to communicate properly with the community.
Thank you very much. Take a swing at that.
I'd be happy to take a swing at that. Our prosecutors routinely meet and interact with victims. In fact, I've encouraged a culture that does exactly that. When I came in, changed our public speaking and our outreach policy. We used to have a number of layers that you'd have to go through. I wanted to relax those layers so that my prosecutors, our prosecutors, could speak to schools, could speak to law enforcement, and most importantly, speak to victims. We have an outstanding victim advocate team. I'm very proud of the individuals that we have, approximately 35. They assist our prosecutors in helping victims, making sure they get the restraining orders they need, making sure they understand the court process, which is complex and technical and sometimes very intimidating. And then I just want to shift and talk a little bit about bail. Bail is still being set. I wish it was being set more. For example, the individual that was alleged to have killed his father here in Moorpark, he is now being held on bail. Two of the individuals who were alleged to have taken jewelry from a Kohl's here in Moorpark, they too had bail set. My deputy DAs, our deputy DAs, will continue to advocate for bail setting, and when the facts and circumstances warrant it, increases in bail. We used to have a very, what I believe, worthy and just something that I wish we could continue to rely on. It's still part of the equation, but it is not the entire equation. And that's called a pre-risk assessment that is done on each and every individual by our probation department. What they would do is they would look at somebody and they'd say, how many times have they failed to appear in court in the past? What's the community or public safety risk should they be let out? Do they have a substance use disorder? Do they have firearms? And they would score each individual on a metric scale. That would go to the judge, that would go to the defense, that too would go to the prosecutor, and that would be used to help guide bail decisions. That's still one factor among others, but I would very much like for that factor to be the one that's most important in our prosecutors determining whether or not bail should be set.
Okay, and a rebuttal, quick rebuttal from John Barrick. 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, I actually had the honor of meeting some of the members of that community who were involved in that shooting where the individual was released from custody. And they were frustrated because when I spoke to them, they had not been permitted to speak to the district attorney representing them on that case.
Okay, next question to Eric. What do you believe is the best method for drug dealer prosecution versus drug user prosecution?
Drug dealers, you have to prosecute aggressively. They are pushing a deadly substance into our communities that gets into the hands of youth, that gets into the hands of our families. It is deeply uprooting. It has tremendous negative impacts. I talked about fentanyl. Let me just go ahead and share with you some statistics which are quite chilling. From 2015 to 2019, in the county of Ventura, we had approximately 37 fentanyl cases, that is either for sale or someone who was possessing it. For the years 2020 and 2021, that is the pandemic years, we had nearly 350. One, we do the admonition that I talked about. You sell this deadly drug, someone dies, you can be charged with murder. Secondly, we are now asking our prosecutors, if the facts and circumstances warrant it, to seek the aggravated term. In California, there's what we call a low term, a mid-term, and a high term. If a drug dealer is selling fentanyl, we're instructing the prosecutor to seek before the court the aggravated term. But also, we have to have public health messaging. We have to make sure that people do not take this. We have to make sure that our youth are informed about the problems inherent in this drug. And we also have to make sure that we are reaching out to schools, to communities, so they understand that drugs can kill. And if you take it once, specifically fentanyl, you can die. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. John?
Colonel, can you say the question again, please?
Yes. What do you believe is the best method for drug dealer prosecution versus drug user prosecution?
Well, the best thing we can do is to prosecute, and I would love to aggressively prosecute. But what you need to know is that the California State Legislature has really hamstrung us on our ability to prosecute drug dealers. The California State Legislature has almost made drug dealing and drug using a non-crime. We can talk about aggressively prosecuting and aggravated factors all we want. We cannot send someone to prison for dealing drugs. Did anyone here know that? Anyone not in law enforcement? No, of course not. We cannot send them to prison. Someone needs to tell you that. Drug use. Yes, you can be arrested. But because of a series of laws, and unfortunately I only have 90 seconds to answer this question, because a series of laws, we can't prosecute them really anymore either. Police make the arrest, they immediately get released, and then we don't file charges. We don't file drug possession or drug under the influence cases anymore in the DA's office because the penalties are so small, it's not worth it. And so we need to change those laws. And you need a DA who's going to be a microphone to Sacramento to tell them to change those laws. Because politicians only respond to pressure, folks. And if you don't have a DA in your county who's willing to be that microphone and willing to put that pressure on Sacramento, all the talk about aggressive prosecution doesn't mean a thing.
And 30 seconds now for Eric.
Let me give you some specific concrete examples of how we stand up for victims. In May, I joined 44 other DAs in the state of California in seeking to block the release of violent felons from California state prisons. I did the same just a couple months ago. One of the court hearings is now stayed, meaning these individuals known as second strikers are not able to get out. Another way that we help our victims is we get funding and support for them. I received $1 million to form a family justice center in Oxnard. The cities of Oxnard and the county are going to expand that money and increase it. This is the way we take actions and we go ahead and help victims.
And 30 seconds now for John Barrick.
So I'm glad that Mr. Nazarenko joined in that list of those restraining orders. I want to point out, though, it wasn't his idea. He didn't file it. He didn't write it. All he did was add his name to a list. As you stand here and listen to us, you will never hear one thing about what Mr. Nazarenko did to prosecute those cases, to actually take the lead against these laws. And the reason is because the people who make the laws are in the club that Mr. Nazarenko wants to join. And if he criticizes those laws, they won't let him in. And so again, aggressive prosecution is great, but you have to mean it. I have a career and experience that shows that I am an aggressive prosecutor, and I will do everything I can to make sure that you're safe.
Oh, here we go. We're going to do another 30 seconds. This is getting good.
You know, this is an exchange that's worth having, and I just want to clarify. You know, 14 months ago, I stepped out of a courtroom into the job of district attorney. I was a sex crimes prosecutor. I specialized in child molestation and rape cases. In doing so, not only did I achieve the Prosecutor of the Year, but I also achieved some of the highest sentences in Ventura County history. People via Sorno, 384 years to life for somebody who had multiple molestation counts against them for harming children. People versus Bork, who had multiple child molestation counts over the course of 40 years. I stand for victims in the courthouse as well as in the office, and we get results for the people that we care about and need to protect.
Okay, we're going to go one more time with John, and then we're going to move on to another question.
I've been Ventura County Prosecutor of the Year twice, and I was awarded the 2014 Sherwood Prize for Combating Hate, which is a tri-county award and very prestigious, given by the Anti-Defamation League.
Okay, stay up there, John. We're going to move on to another topic. This comes from Deb Baber, who writes some really good questions, by the way. Is racism a crime? Let me give you a little more. That's why I'm glad you guys are up here doing this, and I am not. In November 2020, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors unanimously declared that racism is a public health crisis in the county. How do you define racism, and do you agree with the Board of Supervisors?
Yeah, so racism is not a crime, but it's obviously something we do not want in Ventura County. I prosecuted hate crimes for 6.5 years, and it's one of the 3 assignments that I've loved the most in the office. I loved prosecuting hate crimes. I prosecuted white supremacists. And so I don't agree with the Board of Supervisors resolution that Ventura County has that racism is a public health crisis. Racism is a problem, but it's not the only problem. And when you make a declaration against the people of Ventura County, you're basically saying that the people of Ventura County are racist and they need help. There are racists in Ventura County. And if they commit a crime against someone because of their perceived characteristics, which are protected by both the federal and state constitution, I have a history of coming down on them like you wouldn't believe. But that doesn't mean everyone in Ventura County is racist.
Thank you, John.
Hate crimes are something our office takes exceptionally seriously. There's a DA, Haley Moyer, who is assigned to these cases, and we're seeing, unfortunately, an uptick. We're seeing more cases now that are coming into our office than at any point in both 2019 and 2020. And what I share with people is the distinction between hate speech and a hate crime. And what I like to share with them specifically is it is despicable and horrible to use slurs and epithets. That is something we don't want in our society, and we want to make sure it is rooted out and stamped out. But if someone goes ahead and takes a specific act which is accompanied by that slur, such as throwing an object or hitting somebody, that now is a hate crime, because what motivated their behavior, what fueled that battery, that vandalism, was hate towards a specific cognizable group, and those groups warrant law enforcement's protection, and that's what we will continue to do as the Office of the District Attorney.
Let's take the first swing at this one. I'm not sure, do you guys get involved with death certificates and termination of death? Somebody has a question about COVID, and that doesn't fall within your guys'.
I don't think so.
No, okay, we'll move on from that one. How are you going to keep gangs out of Ventura County? This comes from James Rabick.
Yeah, for me first?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
How do you keep gangs out of Ventura?
You know, there was a change in the state law which made it far more difficult for us to prosecute gang cases, and it took effect in January of 2022, just 2 months ago. Nonetheless, we continue to file gang allegations under the Street Terrorism Enforcement and Protection Act in Ventura County. Specifically, we have filed 12. I believe very strongly that gangs terrorize neighborhoods. They intimidate, they threaten, and they need to be dealt with swiftly and aggressively. So in the Office of the District Attorney, if the facts and circumstances warrant it, we will continue to file these special allegations which can increase punishment. It can be an extortion-based crime, robbery, it can be a number of different crimes, but in the Office of this District Attorney, we will continue to file those specific Penal Code Section 186.22 special offenses.
Well, I grew up in Oxnard, and I've been the victim of gang violence. And so when we talk about street gangs, it obviously means a great deal to me. Also because I prosecuted in the hardcore gang unit for 6.5 years. I prosecuted almost 25 gang trials, which is by far the most trials that anyone has prosecuted in that time frame. Let me tell you a little about Assembly Bill 333, which Mr. Nazarenko was referring to. It made it extremely difficult now for us to prosecute street gangs. And he's right about that. And so I've been writing a series of articles in the Conejo Guardian that get republished in the Citizens Journal. And I take on some of these issues that we've been having with these changes in the criminal justice reform that negatively affect crime victims. And I've written articles about AB 33, and I try to alert the public as to the problems to those. I wrote to our illustrious state senators, Monique Lamone and Henry Stern, to stop that legislation from passing. My letters and my pleas were ignored, of course. Those two people have endorsed Mr. Nazarenko.
Sure. I'd be happy to. Assembly Bill 333, I felt very strongly about it. And so strongly that I actually wrote and called the governor's office and I asked them, veto this bill. Sure. And just to clarify something, Mr. Barrick, Jackie Irwin, who I have a strong relationship with, in fact, I'll be testifying on behalf of one of her bills on Tuesday, she voted against it. So, you know, somebody who supported Nazarenko also understood that this bill is not good for public safety. Now, with respect to the other state legislators who have endorsed me, I'm honored to have their support. I'm honored to have their endorsement. And I'll share with you why. Because they share my values, the need to partner, the need to reach out, the need to engage. And also, they are legislators in charge of a nearly $300 billion budget. So I believe, rather than pull away from legislators, we need to reach out to them. I've reached out to Congressmember Mike Garcia to talk about the Victims of Crime Act. I've talked to Congresswoman Julia Brownley to reauthorize the Victims Against Violence Act. Why? Because this brings money to Ventura to help victims, to secure justice, and to make sure that we have the resources in Ventura County that we need.
Another rebuttal from Todd.
So it's true, Mr. Nazarenko did write a letter to the governor asking him to not put forth or sign into law Assembly Bill 333. But only did that after I wrote my articles. I contacted the two senators I talked about in July. In August, I wrote an article in the Conejo Guardian about why we all need to stand up and fight against Assembly Bill 333. September is when his letter to the governor came out. And let me tell you something about a letter to the governor. There's two things. There's a saying, people never let sea get made, laws and sausages. Let me tell you about this sausage. If it's sitting on the governor's desk, it's because they know he's going to sign it. Writing a letter to the governor at that time when it's already sitting on his desk doesn't matter. It's perception. It's being perceived as being tough on crime instead of actually being tough on crime, instead of at least trying to lead the charge to do something to stop it. Let me give you another example. Senate Bill 81. I wrote an article in the Conejo Guardian on Senate Bill 81 in September. And what this Senate bill did, they're telling me I'm taking up too much time. What this Senate bill did was it completely hammered or kept reduced our ability to charge aggravating factors. October, guess what happened? Mr. Nazarenko wrote a letter to the governor asking him not to sign Senate Bill 81.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to do something a little bit different. We do have a handheld mic in the back, correct?
Yes.
So we're going to let you guys, if you have questions, ask questions directly of the gentleman up here. We've only got about 15 minutes, so please keep your questions short. 15 minutes total for the questions, and then you guys will have, and then the candidates will have 5 minutes at the very end to conclude with their remarks. But let's try to do this. This is not part of the plan here, but this should be a lot of fun. So we're going to take questions from the audience for about 15 minutes. Again, please keep them short. And where's the mic is? Right there. Okay.
I'd like to note each position you stand on removing Father Sarah, our founder of Ventura County, from the county seal. and removing him illegally from the statue in front of City Hall. What's your stance on that?
Let's try to keep this to criminal justice issues.
It's criminal. It was illegally removed.
Exactly. I knew better. Anyway, okay. Let's try to stick to more specific to appeal to these guys and directly will impact them in their serving you. Yes, sir, in the back. With your hand up.
This goes directly to both of you. It'd be interesting to see what you say about how you compare yourselves with the District Attorney of Los Angeles and what he believes.
Awesome question. We'll start with Eric.
Well, I'll tell you, Jackie Lacey has endorsed me for a reason, because I very much believe in Jackie Lacey's approach to the criminal justice system rather than the person who succeeded her. I mentioned this in my opening, and I'll give you some, one from just a management perspective. Let me speak from that. You always meet with your line DAs first. Talk to them, meet with them, reach out to them, rather than just go ahead and issue blanket policy directives. One thing I don't like is just dogmatic orthodoxy, meaning it's going to be one way and one way only. I want to hear from people, I want to make sure they're informed, and I want to make sure they inform me. Secondly, we have a deep obligation to keep this county safe, and the way we do that is by making sure if enhancements are warranted, they're filed. If the juvenile needs to be transferred because it's premeditated and depraved and callous and heinous, we need to do so. We have to stand for victims to make sure that they're represented at parole hearings. And furthermore, we need to make sure that we take crime seriously, that we understand that there have to be consequences. We need to recognize that certain actions need to be taken for specific offenses. That's what we do as prosecutors.
Thank you, sir. Oh, yeah. Compare yourself to the LA DA.
Yeah, so
You're going to come out looking good.
the Board of Supervisors did an interview of us January 26, 2021, and they actually asked that question, what we thought of George Gascon and some of his policies. And my answer was pretty succinct. I'm a pretty direct person. And my answer was this. I think George Gascon and his policies are a disaster for public safety. And if I, as a prosecutor, implemented half of the things that he's done, I'd be ashamed to call myself a prosecutor. That's your answer for Gascon.
Very good. Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. This gentleman over here, then we'll come back to you, ma'am. Okay, you're next, okay? Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you. My question is a statement, and I'm a citizen and absolutely a non-politician, former law enforcement guy, FBI, Marine. We are surrounded by lawlessness and skyrocketing crime. The LA County DA is shameful. We have the Mexican border to the south with fentanyl, human trafficking, COVID spreading, violent crime, and tears. Santa Barbara County to the north, growing cannabis, related crime problems, dark buying. A simple question: how will each of you keep us safe?
So as a prosecutor for 17 years, I have, as I told you, dedicated myself to a guiding principle that the victims come first. I promise you I will do everything I can to keep you safe. So interesting note, because I know we were watching some of the sheriff's debate earlier, and it was the crime statistics came up. I've actually, I read a number of studies that are put out by the National Institute of Justice, and one of the prevailing themes of those studies is that a lot of the crime rates that cities and counties are using today, you have to take them with a grain of salt, right? Because 2020 and 2021 crime numbers are skewed because of COVID, because of the shutdown. Because the reality is, when people talk about being afraid, that's not coming out of nowhere, right?
Right.
Like that car, for example. It's the district attorney's responsibility to make sure that everyone feels safe and is safe in their homes. And like I said, Mr. Nazarenko and I are sort of hamstrung by some of the laws that have passed over the years that have taken the emphasis off crime victims and put it on criminals. We have to change those laws. Now, Mr. Nazarenko and I can't change them, right? That comes at the state level. But we can be a microphone to get these laws changed. Like I said earlier, politicians respond to pressure. And if you're not putting the pressure on them to keep you safe, they won't do it. Right now, the political climate is all about the criminals. It's all about helping them, and it's about making law enforcement feel like they're the criminals. And that has to stop. So you need a DA who's willing to meet with you, to tell you the truth about the things that are going on out there, and who's going to fight for you. And that's me.
One of my supporters is our former district attorney, Mike Bradbury, who was in this seat for 24 years, and he knows this job. He knows what it takes to be in a leadership position. And he wrote recently, and he said, you know, keeping Ventura County safe doesn't simply happen by accident. It takes effort. It has to be conscious. It has to be deliberate. And we can't lower our guard. We're blessed in Ventura County. You know, you look at crime rates in the 1990s, per 1,000, both violent and property, in 30 for every 1,000. Today, 17.2, 17.5. One of the ways we achieve this is by making sure that we bring in talented and dedicated men and women into this office. You look at the investigators and the DAs that we've brought in, Catherine Plant, who's here from Fresno County. We have investigators who have come from Oxnard, LAPD, Long Beach, some of the best in blue right here in Ventura County. Our prosecutors from Cook County, Chicago, Vegas, they come here because they understand that this is a culture that cares about public safety, that has strong working relationship with our law enforcement partners, and that we will value them, their profession, and make sure that they get the resources they need to fight for all of you in our courtroom.
And a quick rebuttal from Mr. Barrick.
I agree with Mr. Nazarenko that a strong working relationship with law enforcement is important. You know, when I decided to run, my first phone calls were to the police officer associations. And I know a lot of those guys, and I consider them very close friends of mine. And every one of them told me this: John, we love you. We respect you. We want you to be our DA. We think you would be great. We're not going to support you if we think you're going to lose. That's how a friend speaks to you. So what I said was totally fair. Watch my momentum. Watch what I do over the next several months. I have now been endorsed by every police officer association in this county. You need a DA who has a strong working relationship with law enforcement, because as we go into the 21st century, crime enforcement is changing, and we have to work together with law enforcement, not separate. And you need the DA who's been supported almost universally by law enforcement.
Okay, another question from the audience. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so my question is, and it pertains to human trafficking, that is the most profitable criminal enterprise in the nation. So my specific question has to do is, what are you going to do to work with law enforcement to make sure victims are saved and the perpetrators are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
There is a bill by a state legislator, Grove, that will make human trafficking offenses what we call strike offenses. That is, more significant, higher punishments. I am in support of it. I have indicated my support to her, as well as groups like Forever Found. We have in the district attorney's office a extremely dedicated and talented prosecutor who specializes in HT human trafficking cases. We bring perpetrators to justice. We participate in a countywide task force which works with federal and state entities as well as local law enforcement to suppress and attempt to dismantle human trafficking rings. but we can't let our guard down. We have to keep making sure that these crimes are prosecuted, that hopefully this legislation passes and they will become what we consider under California law violent offenses rather than non-violent offenses. These are cases that I have prosecuted as a sex crimes prosecutor, and I want to see the penalties and consequences increase even further for these very, very violent and deeply disturbing crimes.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Nazarenko and I are in complete agreement about this. I actually give a series of talks on human trafficking around the county now. And so I'm very well aware of how prevalent it is and how disturbing it is. People in Ventura County, I know we like to think that we're safe and we want to be safe. But human trafficking is everywhere. Now, fortunately, in 2019, the District Attorney's Office received a grant with the help of the Sheriff's Department to create a task force to prosecute hate crime. And Mr. Nazarenko is correct. We have a great attorney who's prosecuting those. Unfortunately, she's leaving, but she's being replaced by another great attorney. So the office does take hate crimes very seriously, and they have been for a long time, at least since 2019. Any legislation that increases the penalties for people convicted of human trafficking on any level, and we're not just talking about sex trafficking, we're talking about labor trafficking as well, I am all for. I think there's a bill right now, Mr. Nazarenko just talked about, that would make human trafficking convictions a strike. I would love to see that pass. Thank you.
It's a sad state of affairs, really. I mean, that's just what parents have to deal with these days with their kids possibly being trafficked. It's just unbelievable. Another question in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. First, thank you both gentlemen for all your service to your community and fighting crime for all the years that you've been in office or helping. And so I have a few comments directed first at Mr. Nazarenko, and then I have a few questions if I can get them out, but at least I want to make these comments because you were actually my city council member for Ventura prior to being appointed to DA. And as such, you had some very biased declarations that you supported. The first one was in July of 2020 when you denounced racism and you denounced police brutality. Second proclamation that you did in October of 2020 that you supported was directly aimed at me and the people who supported me, and it was a proclamation denouncing white supremacy, specifically related to the Trump car caravan incident in front of City Hall when a group of Native Americans were praying. It was mentioned in the proclamation that was the exact reason why you did the white supremacy declaration, and in my opinion, that is hate speech directed at an entire group of your residents. And I'd like to know how you're going to keep that bias out of the office when you're running for district attorney. Now, the question in relation to hate crimes, you both have mentioned hate crimes, and it's something you're very...
Could I just interrupt you and have him answer the first question first?
Sure,
and then
what was
come
the
back?
first question?
Well, you talk about how...
How are you going to keep your bias out of the office?
Sorry, yeah.
And we'll come back to...
Yeah, and thank you for the question. You know, Lady Justice wears a blindfold for a reason, and that is to avoid bias, prejudice. It doesn't see red, it doesn't see blue, it just sees justice. So that's how I serve as your district attorney. I want you to know that. You know, we follow facts, we follow evidence, we apply the law fairly, we use the body of law that is our penal and our evidence code and other bodies of state law, and we abide by Supreme Court, California Appellate Court, and other court decisions. This is the framework that I operate as your district attorney, and I will continue to do that in the months and years ahead.
Okay, then we'll take one more question from you, and then we're going to have to give the candidates their time to closing remarks. So please, one more question from the audience, and then we'll let these gentlemen close everything up for us.
Let's pass it on to one other person.
Okay.
Can you guys ask a joint one, maybe?
Listen, this is regarding, it's a totally separate issue. I have a lot more, obviously, that I could speak to Mr. Nazarenko about because I know him pretty well. Well, I know him not personally, but I know him well because I'm very familiar with what goes on in the city of Ventura. City of Ventura has the highest crime rate in the county. We had over 90,000 calls for service in the year 2020. Out of those, 11 rose to the occasion of a hate crime. So it's interesting that you guys continue to focus on hate crimes when you have that extraordinary number of crimes being committed in your city, just the city, let alone the county. We are the highest in the county. So my next question, because in our city specifically, we have about less than 500 vagrants in the community. They take up 50% of the resources for fire and police combined, and for both departments separately, right? And you're focused on hate crimes. The second question is, as the county district attorney, and this goes for both of you, would you eliminate the special department that handles the vagrants in the community? They have their own special department that when they're given tickets for whatever they're doing, they do a lot of horrible things in our city that go completely unnoticed, right? It just gets shoved aside. So we want to know, are you going to do something differently? Are they going to start getting treated like the rest of us? That if I defecated or peed on the street, I'm not going to get a little ticket and been sent on my way? Or are they going to get prosecuted for the crimes they commit?
Yeah, to answer your question, I know homelessness is a real problem in the county. The vast majority of homelessness is due to drugs. Now, an interesting thing about the drug use is I think Californians spoke pretty loudly that we don't want to crowd our jails with people who have substance abuse problems. But we have a problem in the way the state of California goes about it. And it's because we want people to get treatment. But the way we used to be able to get those people treatment was by holding jail over their head. Well, because the penalties are so low now, they don't even get jail anymore. They get arrested, they go to jail, they get booked, they're released almost immediately, and we don't file the cases. So Californians don't want our jails crowded with drug users, but they basically decriminalize most of the drug laws, including drug sales. And now the state of California, including in Ventura County, is handing out meth pipes and needles.
Oh!
So, hold on. So, to answer your question, we have a homeless court because we don't want to crowd our criminal justice system with what basically amount to minor offenses. And I know they're not minor to you, and I respect that. But we don't want to crowd our criminal justice system with infractions, with tickets, and that sort of thing. But my motto is, and my guiding principle is, victims come first. And if a homeless person commits a crime and hurts another person, I will prosecute them.
All right. I would just add to that, you may know, when I served as the city's mayor, I helped increase funding for both our police force as well as our firefighters. That meant more firefighters and more police officers on Ventura streets. We have a member here of the Ventura Police Department. It's an outstanding agency. They have the Patrol Task Force, which specializes in homeless, vagrancy-based crimes. They also have the Ambassador Program, which former Mayor Cheryl Heitman initiated. These are good programs that work. More needs to be done, but I feel that we are making a difference in Ventura in terms of reunifying families, addressing vagrancy, and making sure that we enjoy a high quality of life in a fantastic beach community.
I have a question for both of you. I met a woman who was attacked at the Jan's Mall, hit with a pipe by a gentleman who was on his fourth violent crime. Whatever happened to the 3 strikes you're outlaw? And why wasn't that imposed on him?
And this will be our last question from the audience, and then we're going to do closing arguments.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, to answer that question, I don't know the facts of circumstances of your crime, and that sounds awful. Why that person was out after having 3 previous strikes or 4 previous strikes, I don't know. He shouldn't have been. We prosecute the best we can, but that is unacceptable, and that shouldn't have happened to you.
Okay, it's going to be time. I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you want to go ahead and give me the name of the offender, the date of offense, I'll be happy to go ahead and look into it. We can find out the status of that case. So just want you to know that happy to make sure that some follow-up is done.
Okay, now it's time for our candidates' final statements. We're going to start with Mr. Barrick first, 5 minutes for each candidate. And Mr. Barrick.
The state of California has adopted a policy when it comes to crime victims. And that policy is a twofold question. To anyone who commits a crime, state legislatures ask you, who did you hurt And how can I help you? I promise you this. Our current slate of state legislators do not care one bit about crime victims. And I can say that freely and openly because I've seen the laws that they've passed over the last several years. Remember, one of my frustrations was the fact that these laws are being passed and no one in my field especially is doing anything or saying anything to stop it. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can change things. We can elect people who aren't career politicians, who are self-serving and only interested in the next highest office. We can elect people who are dedicated to victims' rights. We can elect people who are dedicated to serving you before they serve themselves. We can elect people who want to stand up for law enforcement and the great work they do keeping us safe. We can elect people who will not allow politics to enter into the decision-making process. You know, there's a saying I go by, a rule, another rule. And that's, if you really want to get to know someone, know their friends. Well, that rule holds true too in politics. When I made the decision to run for district attorney, understand that I consider myself a frontline worker. I'm a guy who gets in the trenches. I roll up my sleeves and I get into work. Roll up my sleeves and get to work. I'm the one who gets down in the dirt with other first responders like police officers and firemen and do the jobs that you need done to keep you safe. Given that, my first phone calls were to cops, were to law enforcement, were to other first responders, people who work on the front lines, like I do, in keeping you safe. Mr. Nazarenko's first phone calls were to politicians. Career politicians who stood by and did nothing while these laws that have so negatively affected your lives have been passed over and over and over again. I think on this stage today, you've learned a lot about the two candidates and our differences and our different approaches to putting victims first and to making sure that everyone stays safe in this county. But the reasons you should support me aren't only because I'm from Ventura County, not only because I grew up here, not only because I've dedicated my life to a guiding principle of putting victims first, not only because I want to stand up for law enforcement and the great work they do keeping us safe, not only because I'm not a career politician, and not only because I will not allow politics to enter into my decision-making process. The reason you want me as your DA is this. One day, one of you or a loved one will become a victim of a serious crime. And I promise you, when that day comes, if it does, I'm the one you want in your corner. Because I will give you everything I have to bring back your dignity and to restore justice that you deserve. I want to thank the California Republican Assembly for holding this. I want to thank Mr. Nazarenko. I want to thank Colonel Patterson. And vote for John Barrick for District Attorney. Thank you.
I too want to thank all of you. This is a healthy exchange because it underscores and I think underlines as well just sort of a distinction in our leadership styles. I want to network, collaborate, and partner to get results and to fight for all of you. Because when you partner, collaborate, and build relationships, you get help for crime victims, you get better outcomes for justice, and you secure what we need for the County of Ventura and its residents. Let me give you some specific examples. Shortly after I was appointed district attorney, I was able to receive 2 additional prosecutors in the office of the district attorney, bringing our level to 107. I also was able to secure a grant that helps to fund a prosecutor to go after dating violence, stalking, and DV crimes. Just a couple weeks ago, we received $2.5 million to form the first ever cold case sexual assault unit in the district attorney's office. to have the long arm of the law reach back and hold perpetrators and offenders of sexual assault potentially accountable for their conduct. This is how I believe you want your district attorney to work on your behalf. To fight in the courtroom, to get resources for victims, and to make sure that justice is served. You know, I'm very proud of a broad bipartisan network that I have assembled. People like Jeff Dean, your supervisor, Supervisor Bob Huber, Mayor Pro Tem Elaine Lister, Simi Valley Police Chief David Livingstone. Broad, bipartisan, across the aisle. That's the way you govern a county like Ventura. You make sure that you don't see one way or the other. You see justice, you see resources, and you figure out how to bring them to your prosecutors so they can fight and do the job of justice in the courtroom. We have been able to hire, just in the last 14 months, 13 new prosecutors and 6 additional investigators. They're working for you, they're protecting public safety, and they're making sure that we get results for Ventura County residents and its victims. I too want to thank Colonel Patterson, Lori. I also want to thank the California Republican Assembly for all of you for spending time on an afternoon to hear about our views, our philosophies, and how I, as your district attorney, will continue to keep all of you safe.
How about a round of applause, guys, for the candidates today?